everybody, welcome back to Bentley House Minis and happy Halloween. This has been a whirlwind of a month for me, but I'm so glad I was able to at least fit one Beetlejuice video into October. It seemed only fitting. And the one thing I can't stop thinking about was the Deo scene, or the shrimp hands. And sometimes when I get something stuck in my head, I just have to go ahead and make it so that I can move on to something else. I know this was going to be a little bit of a difficult one because sculpting hands is always a challenge. But what's more perfect for Halloween than your food coming alive and grabbing your face? That's scary. Now before I can actually get to making the spooky hands, I actually need to make a table for the dining room because I can't just set my shrimp on the ground. Delia would never. So let's get started. In the movie, Delia's table has a granite or marble looking top, so I had to figure out how to recreate that in miniature. I'm going to be using this thick piece of balsa wood. Balsa wood is the type of wood that's very lightweight, almost kind of like a foam type material, but it's really easy to cut through. I try to stay away from the thinner cuts of balsa wood because I find it to be a little bit weak, but the thicker types are really nice to work with, especially for countertops and tabletops. To create the cut granite look, I'm just going to be cutting along the edges and making different faceted cuts, which means just like lots of angles on the very end. Once I'm happy with both sides of the table, I'm going to be covering it in some black Mod Podge. This is a mixture of 50% black paint and 50% Mod Podge, and I just keep it in this medium salsa jar for easy use. This is going to be my first layer that's really going to seal the wood, because later on I'm going to be adding resin and I don't want anything sinking into the wood fibers, and even the paint that I'm going to put on top of this Mod Podge can sometimes sink into balsa wood. So adding a layer of Mod Podge, and I'm actually going to do a couple layers, is going to help seal everything so I have a solid surface that I'm painting onto. Because wood does have a tendency to warp whenever you add anything that has some sort of liquid, I'm making sure to paint both sides at the same time. Once all the layers of Mod Podge are dry, I'm sanding it to get rid of as much of the wood texture as possible because I'm wanting this to look more like stone. I'm doing a base coat of gray because this looks like the biggest, or the color that covers the most area on the table. And then I'm going to be splatter painting with a lighter white color. To do this, I'm adding a lot of water and a little bit of paint, and I'm going to be using a toothbrush to splatter it. I'm going to first test which way the splatter is going with just a little bit of water in my hand. This will kind of help me figure out which direction to point the toothbrush so I get most of it on the table. I'm just going to get a little bit on the brush, get most of it off, and start splattering. And also make sure you remove your phone or anything that you don't want splattered from the area. I'm going to be doing a pretty heavy coat of the white just because, well, I'm kind of going by feel here, what I think matches the photo of the table the best, but honestly most of this will be covered up, so I'm just kind of playing and doing what I like. I mixed in a little bit of black paint into my previous mixture of the white to get a darker gray, and I'm going to be using less of this. It's just going to be a little bit of a different spot shown in the granite. And then finally, I am using the same color that was my base color. I felt like the white and the dark dots were a little bit overwhelming, and so to dull it back down, I'm using my base coat color to just go over the top, and it'll kind of bring everything together, in my opinion. This is just me playing around trying to figure out what's going on. And I think I added a little bit too much water because my toothbrush kept splattering paint everywhere, but then it kind of gave an interesting effect, so I kept some of the splotches. But anyway, this is how it ended up. It's one of those techniques that's just really fun to play around with, so if you want to give it a try, I highly suggest it. It may be hard to see in the camera, but there were still wood streaks that you could see. You could still tell that it was a granite pattern painted on a wood surface. So what I'm going to do is use some UV resin to coat the entire thing to give it a very smooth finish. I covered my workspace with some wax paper and lifted the tabletop up off the work surface so that the resin could go down the side and not get stuck to my worktop. I'm using a piece of card and I'm just going to smooth it over the surface, trying to get it as flat as possible. It was pretty easy to tell where it was, although I did notice that turning it from side to side helped me see if there were any areas that didn't quite get covered. And once I was happy with my coverage, I let it sit for just a few seconds, maybe like a minute, to make sure everything leveled out. Then it was time for the UV light, and this I did the technique where I start far away and slowly get closer and closer. This keeps the resin from curing too quickly and causing the tabletop to warp. I also made sure to put it in my larger UV curing oven just to make sure everything was completely 100% cured. You can see here I also made sure that the UV resin went down the sides and over those cuts I created, and I just made sure that there were no drips before I started curing. And this is the finished tabletop, and I'm pretty happy with it. I think it turned out okay. To create the bottom of the table, I'm going to be using some wood dowels, and I'm going to be using the smaller one to create the frame. The frame is really going to just help me line up the legs of the table. Because the edges of this table were not exactly even, it was a little bit difficult to figure out where the frame needed to be, so I just used my best judgment. Once the frame was dry, I added onto the legs, and these are just going to be put into the corner of the frame, and this will help me know that my legs are sitting straight up and down and in the right areas. Once I have all four, I just make sure to turn it around continually, hoping that they are all at 90-degree angles. Once I'm happy and pretty sure that the glue has taken hold and will keep them in place, I let it dry completely. Off camera, I added these little triangle pieces that you can see along each side of the leg. These just help give them a little bit of support. Sorry, I forgot to record that part. In the movie, it's really hard to see what the legs of this table actually look like, and so I'm just deciding to paint them black because there is a black floor, so I'm thinking that that's probably why it's hard to see the table legs, because they blend into their surroundings. I'm just using black Mod Podge like I did in the beginning for this. I will make the chairs to go with the dining room set a little bit later. I ran out of time in this video, but I didn't want to rush them because they're very iconic chairs. So moving on to the shrimp. I of course tried to go the easy route first. I had to make 6 hands after all. So you may be wondering, what's the easy route? Well, I was going to try to make a mold of an existing hand so I didn't have to sculpt all of the hands. I was looking through my collection of disembodied hands. I have quite a few actually. These were sent to me by a friend for my Addams Family project, and I still have them. I'm using Marvelous Mold Putty to do this, and it's just a 2-part even mixture to create the mold putty. Usually have about 5 or so minutes to create the mold. I knew I wanted to create it a hand mold where it was sitting upside down, or yeah, so it was sitting right side up, well, where the hand, I don't know how to, just like this on camera. And the reason for this is because I was thinking I could pour liquid clay in there and bake it, because you can put this mold putty into the oven, and that would be how I would create my hands. Pulling the porcelain hand out of the mold was not very easy, and in fact I did end up breaking it. If I do create molds like this, I typically try to cut down the side of the mold, and that's what I did here, but once I got the hand out I was able to cut it a little bit further. I'm using this liquid polymer clay that I've had for a while, so the results that you're about to see may be just because I've had this for so long, but I thought it was working because every time I added some, it seemed to sink down into the mold, and I just kept adding drop by drop and banging it on the table, hoping that my mold was completely filling. And this is how it looked before I baked it. After baking it, it looked like it had risen a little bit, and this gave me hope because this part that I could see was actually pretty tough. But after pulling the hand completely out of the mold, I could see that something didn't go quite right. It was definitely missing all the fingers, and I do think that the fingers actually did fill up with clay, but I don't know if there were just a lot of bubbles. but it ended up being really crumbly as well, so I'm not sure it would have been a very strong hand. And I did find that there were like little fingers inside and I couldn't get them out, so it kind of ruined my mold. So anyway, that was one idea. Well, that didn't work, so now I'm moving on to doing it the hard way. The first thing I needed to create were the fingers. The fingers are very clearly shrimp and they're kind of curled, kind of in this attack position that all menacing hands in horror movies are. They all kind of have this like attack look. I'm going to be using a roller to form these fingers around. You only can do this, because I'm going to be putting it in the oven, you can only do this if you have a glass roller, not an acrylic roller. Don't ask me how I know this, just trust me. I'm leaving my little porcelain hand on the table so I can kind of keep in mind what a 1/12 scale hand will look like. These are okay to be a little bit bigger because you can tell in the movie they are gloves that are on a real human hand, which make them slightly bigger. I'm going to be creating the shrimps out of two basic cone shapes. The first one is going to be a little bit longer. This is going to be the long body of the shrimp, and then I'm going to create another one that will be the tail. So this first part I'm just focusing on creating this curved little body that's going to sit on top of the roller. After that's done, I'm going to create a smaller cone shape or teardrop shape and roll it out so that one side is a little bit smaller. Then I'm going to take a sculpting tool and flatten it out so it's a little bit more of a fin shape. Think your typical mermaid tail, but just like really, really small. I'm also making little bitty lines in there so it still has that fin look. And then I'm going to lay it on top of my previously sculpted shrimp body and attach it, just very small movements trying to get the clay to go together. And then I am using that same tool to make some little lines up the shrimp body to give it some texture. Once everything's attached, I can go back and really focus on those tails, making sure I'm happy with the shape of each one. While those are baking, I can go ahead and focus on the wrist and palm of the hand. I rolled out a snake of clay that's about the same width that I want the wrist to be, and then I cut it into 6 equal sections, and then I'm flattening out one side of it, and this is going to be my palm of my hand. And I'm going to cut it off where the fingers would be connected. So I have just a slight diagonal at the top. This is going to be what I'm attaching the fingers to. Now that the shrimp fingers are baked, I can go ahead and put the entire hand together. These were a little bit difficult to get off. I had to be very careful. I ended up breaking a couple, so if you do want to try this, I suggest making a few extra shrimp. I'm starting with the middle finger, so sorry about that, but it's the easiest one to figure out because it needs to be the longest and it needs to sit a little bit over to the right of the center of the palm. So there's only going to be 4 fingers that stick out the top of the palm wrist area, and then the thumb is going to come out the side. And so just kind of look at a real hand, figure out where those fingers come out, and you can kind of estimate where the others need to go. And this is an example of one of the shrimp I broke. I broke off the very end of that pinky tail, so I do replace it a little bit later. But this is a pretty easy way to get a somewhat decent looking hand. So now I decided to make just 4 of these because I want to make a couple bowls that just have the shrimp, and so this also kept me from having to make 6 hands. I'm only making 4. Before I do my second bake on these hands, I decided to go ahead and use the liquid clay for what its actual purpose is, which more of like a clay glue. And I'm just going to add this all around the area where the fingers touch the palm. This is just going to give a little bit of extra insurance that these are going to attach when baking in the oven. I'm doing it on the front of the hand and the back of the hand, just really trying to get it into those crevices. Now, I did want to make sure that my hands did not flatten out in the oven, so I made just a really tiny snake of aluminum foil for the hands and the fingers to drape over while they were baking. When they came out, I realized that the liquid clay had dripped down a little bit onto the aluminum foil, which is not a problem because I just took some flush cutters and cut off any of that excess clay that I didn't want on my hand. To finish these hands off and make sure that they are as strong as possible, I'm taking a very, very thin oval of clay and placing it over where the knuckles would be on the hand. I'm making sure the clay gets in between the fingers and smoothing it into the hand itself. This is going to completely make sure that the fingers are officially attached, and I'm glad I used the liquid clay because it did work really well to keep them in place while I was sculpting, and I didn't feel like I was constantly fighting with the fingers moving around. You can see the difference of adding the knuckle clay versus just leaving it plain. I added another oval of clay around where the thumb is. There's usually a little bit of extra meat on the hand in that area anyway, so you can also just add that on around the finger. I did kind of go over the shrimp body a little bit, so when I did that, I made sure to go back and add in any detail. I did the same thing in the palm area because this area had gotten a little bit rough because of the way that I did the liquid polymer clay, so I just put a very thin layer and then smoothed it out and down onto the wrist, which I think really gave a nice finish to the hand. Now when you look at the movie stills, and I'm going to add a link to the actual scene in the description box below. If you haven't seen Beetlejuice and you want to check it out, you can see the whole scene, but it does have like these wrinkles or these kind of scales on there. So to kind of pay homage to that, I made a spiral of clay that starts at the palm and goes all the way down, and then I just smoothed it into the hand. And here you can see the difference between one where I added the details and the little extra bits of clay versus the one where I didn't. Not only does it look better by doing this, but it's a lot stronger as well. So now it's time to give these their final bake, and as you can see, they did get quite a bit bigger than the original 12 scale hand, but as I said before, I'm okay with that because they're supposed to be these big, kind of scary horror hands. So now I'm going to put them aside somewhere safe because I'm really nervous about breaking these. So while my shrimp hands were contained, it was time to make the bowls. I'm not sure why I decided to do the bowls out of paper when obviously I already had my polymer clay stuff out, but I really just wanted to do this, I guess. So I'm going to be using very thin strips of paper to create a spiral, which I will then shape into a bowl. And maybe that's why I decided to do it this way, because I felt like I could make them a little bit more even, and they do turn out okay, but if you want to do this in polymer clay, that probably makes a little bit more sense as well. So I don't know, I'm a paper person. I love doing things in paper. To make the spiral, I'm starting by gluing a flattened end of a toothpick to the very end of my paper. Then I'm going to be rolling it up in a tight spiral, and I didn't quite know how much paper I was going to need, but I ended up doing 2 strips of paper glued together to make my spiral a little bit bigger. I'll show you the reason why I know I need it to be bigger in just a second. To do this, I'm just gluing it onto the end and then continuing to spiral. Because I'm going to be creating this into a bowl, I'm not adding glue along the way. I'm only adding glue when I get to the very end. This will allow my spiral to kind of form into a bowl. This is how I'm going to tell whether the bowl is large enough or the spiral is large enough, by making sure my hand will fit inside. Once the glue is dry, I can go ahead and start pushing on the very edge of the spiral very gently and slowly forming it upward into a bowl shape. I've done this before to create a teacup in another video, but it is a really fun way to make bowls, and you can always do some kind of filler on the edge to make it smoother. I'm not going to do this for this video because I kind of like the papery edge it gives. It kind of looks like hand-thrown pottery, which seems like something Delia would really enjoy. To make sure that the spiral doesn't come undone or it doesn't go out of its bowl shape, I'm adding glue on the inside and using a Q-tip to smooth it around all on the edges. To create a base for the bowl, I'm using another piece of paper. This is a little bit thinner, and I'm only using 1 length of paper so that the base will be a shorter spiral. I'm following the very same steps for this, and once I'm ready, I'm just forming it into like a bit more of a shallower bowl. And then I'm adding glue to the inside so it can dry. Once I have all 6 of the large bowls and all 6 of the smaller bases, I can go ahead and cut them free from their toothpicks. Be careful because they will go flying. And then I will line them up to make sure that I have enough to make 6 bowls. 4 of them are going to have hands and 2 of them are going to have shrimp cocktail. I'm using a combination of gel super glue and tacky glue because it takes hold really quickly when the two come in contact. I added the super glue to the base, which is sitting inverted, so the rounded part is facing towards the mat, and then I'm adding the upper part with the tacky glue, so when the two touch, they become one bowl that kind of has a pedestal. And then I can go ahead and paint it a deep blue because that's what Delia has in the movie. Upon closer look at the bowls, they're actually pretty interesting. They have these little yellow rings with like these little 3 things coming off of them. And even in the scene in the movie, you can see where the yellow ring came off and got stuck on one of the shrimp hand gloves. This yellow ring is something I call a pain in the butt detail. I couldn't quite figure out how to make it. It was kind of making me not want to finish the bowls. So instead I just decided to give a nod to the yellow ring. And in the future I may 3D print the bowls and try to move the shrimp hands over to the new bowls. But many times these are the details that keep me from finishing a project. So I'd much rather do something a little bit simpler and continue on. I'm going to be using my scrambled egg yolk fever yellow that we created in one of my past live streams in order to create the ring around the bowl. To do this and make it as even as possible, I am going to put just a splotch of the paint and then dip the top of the bowl into it, and this should give me a fairly even ring. It turns out the bowl itself is not super even, which I kind of knew that going in, but it helps me not have to hand paint and try to keep it even that way. I knew these were going to be extremely top heavy because there's a giant clay hand coming out of a tiny paper bowl. So to counteract that, I am making some cardstock black placemats, which you can see on the table in the movie, so they're accurate, but these are going to help counteract the bowls tipping over, and I'm just going to glue the bowls in place so they are not removable. Then I can glue the hand into the bowl, and we're starting to have something that looks like something from the Deo scene. I also wanted to create the regular shrimp bowls, and this is going to include the shrimps that were left over that I didn't make into hands. I'm just using some tacky glue, dipping the very end of the shrimp into the glue, and then making sure that I use the curved part of the shrimp to go over the outside of the bowl. In the movie you can see they're pretty big and they flop over the edge. I'm trying not to make them too even, but also kind of evenly space them out. So that was kind of fun to try and figure out the best look for them. I'm going to be dry brushing some acrylic paint over the top of the shrimp hands. I did use this color clay because they are a very reddish, orangish hue, but there are different colors that you see in the shrimp hands themselves. The dry brushing really brings out the detail of the sculpting in the shrimp. You can see the little lines that I created, and it helps bring out the lines in the fins at the very ends of the tails, and I really think it brought a lot to the hands. I also used a black wash to go over it a little bit because you can see some shadows or some black in the hands, and so I added that on as well. All of this really adds to making this look a little bit more realistic. I added a little bit of the black into the center of the shrimp bowl. You can't really see anything else that's in there, but it does make sense that there would be just a little bit darker in there or a little bit shadowy once you get deeper inside the bowl. So now it's time to put everything on the table. Of course, I need to add the chairs, I need to add some silverware, I need to add a few more things in the center of the table. But at the moment, I'm pretty happy with what I've created here. I knew it would be quite a task to create these hands and make them look both like shrimp and make them look creepy and get them standing upright in the bowl. But I think I'm pretty happy with how they came out and with the table. So that's all I have for you today. But now it's time to look at some attic houses that were sent in for the attic diorama. If you want some more information on this project, you can find it in the description box below the title of this video. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has sent in an attic house for the Beetlejuice diorama, or well, I guess it's a Beetlejuice entire dollhouse. It has been so fun to see all these houses come in. I have read all your letters, and I think it's so amazing that a lot of these have a very special meaning either to you or to the area where you live, and that makes them even more special to me. I've been thinking about possibly making 2 dioramas with the houses because I'm pretty sure we will have enough. And I've gotten quite a few different scales, which is totally fine because it really helps me be able to grab from different scale houses. But maybe we'll do one that has a little bigger houses and we'll do one that has a little bit smaller houses. I don't know, I'll kind of play around with it, but I'm having so much fun seeing all your creativity come in, and I want to make sure that I use it in the best possible way. As I said before, they will all be featured in the Beetlejuice house, and my other idea was possibly to make a wall that opens up, and any houses that aren't on the diorama table are actually displayed within the wall, hopefully have some lighting and make it look really, really cool. So anyway, let me know what you think about that. I will let you go ahead and finish watching these amazing entries for the attic houses. And as always, if anyone sent me Etsy information, I will try and put it in the description box below if you wanted to check out their other work. I did have quite a few extras sent in this round, and so I wanted to make sure and show you those. It's hard for me to show you everything because it took me 2 hours to open these packages, which was amazing and so much fun, but would make a forever long video. So I always try to show as much as I can, but all of these gifts are so amazing. I cannot wait to find places to put them in. And I opened up the package of these beautiful shrimp bowls after I had made my own, but don't worry, all of this gorgeous food will be going into Delia's kitchen, which I do have the walls up for that, so maybe we'll be kind of making Delia's fridge soon, so all of that can be displayed. But big thank you to everyone who sent these in. I hope you all have a fantastic week, and I will see you in the next one. Happy Halloween! How's it going down there? Are you hungry? I made shrimp. Shrimp fingers. We're all wearing black and white. Beetlejuice, me, and Stormy.